Pristine Swiss mountain village. It's freezing cold, it's covered in snow, and the air is just thick with the smell of, I don't know, expensive fondue and diesel fumes.
Right, from all the motorcades. You're talking about Davos.
We are, of course, talking about Davos, the World Economic Forum. But this year, I don't know, it feels different, doesn't it?
It really does.
I mean, we've got the numbers. It's the largest gathering in its entire 56-year history. We're talking 3,000 participants, a record 850 CEOs, 65 heads of state, all crammed into this tiny village.
Right.
But looking at the sources we've pulled for this deep dive, the vibe isn't celebration. It feels more like a crisis management meeting.
That is exactly the right way to frame it. I mean, the official theme on the banner is a spirit of dialogue.
Which sounds very nice, very diplomatic.
Of course. But when you actually dig into the speeches, the interviews, the backroom leaks, you realize that dialogue is maybe the last thing that's really happening. What we're seeing is a collision.
A collision of worldviews.
Precisely. You have the U.S., Europe, and global business leaders who are, well, they're fundamentally disagreeing on how the world should even work.
And for you, the listener, this really matters because these aren't just abstract debates happening in some ski resort.
No, not at all. We're talking about the rewriting of the economic rules that have basically governed your life since World War II.
And we're going to unpack all of it. We've got the U.S. booming but threatening trade wars with its closest allies. We've got Europe, frankly, terrified and militarizing at a pace we haven't seen in decades.
And then there's the story that just sounds like fiction.
Oh, I know. A diplomatic blowout over the, of all things, the purchase of Greenland that is actively hurting the war effort in Ukraine.
It is a lot to get through. But let's start with the atmosphere itself, because there's a paradox here that's it's a little hard to wrap your head around.
Right, because on paper, economically, things should be great. Burge Brenda, he's the president of the WEEF, he opened the forum with some surprisingly sunny numbers.
He did.
He noted that the whole slow growth decade everyone was terrified of back in the early 2020s, it didn't happen.
Nope. Global growth is expected at, what, 3.3% this year? Trade volume is actually up. And get this, $1.5 trillion was invested in new technologies last year alone.
So if you just look at the spreadsheets, the global economy is resilient, it's booming.
Exactly. The wallet is full, but the mood is dark. Bren himself called the geopolitical backdrop arguably the most difficult since 1945.
That's the split-screen reality. Economic boom, geopolitical bust, and, you know, no one captured this anxiety better than Larry Fink.
The CEO of BlackRock.
Yeah.
The man who manages more money than the GDP of most countries.
When he talks, markets listen, and he did not hold back in his opening remarks.
He really didn't. Usually these guys are so guarded, very corporate. But Fink just admitted that despite the record attendance, the forum feels out of step with the moment. He talks about a deep institutional mistrust.
And his theory on why that mistrust exists is fascinating. He basically argued that the globalization of the last 30 years, that whole post-Berlin Wall era, it created massive wealth, but it was just too narrow.
Exactly. It created billionaires and cheap t-shirts, but it hollowed out the middle class in the West. And Fink's warning here is so critical for anyone paying attention to tech right now.
The AI warning.
The AI warning. He said, look at AI. If we let AI do to white-collar work, lawyers, coders, writers, what globalization did to blue-collar manufacturing, we are going to see a total collapse of social trust.
That's a terrifying thought. Globalization 1.0 took the factory jobs in the Rust Belt. Globalization 2.0, powered by AI, might take the office jobs in the Zoom Belt.
And if the gains from that only flow to the people who own the servers and the data,
then you have a recipe for social unrest that makes what we're seeing now look mild.
That was the heavy cloud hanging over everything. But while the business guys like Fink are worried about trust, the political leaders, they're worried about survival.
Yeah.
And that brings us to Europe.
Let's talk about Europe. Because usually the European delegation at Davos is all about soft power, climate change, the rules-based order.
Very polite.
Very polite. But Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, she came out swinging this year.
She did. She dropped a phrase that I think just defines this entire new era. She said, nostalgia will not bring back the old order.
And the translation there is pretty clear.
It is. The world we knew is dead. Stop waiting for it to come back.
Exactly. She's telling Europe to wake up. And she brought the receipts, too. She highlighted a massive surge in defense spending. We're talking up to 800 billion euros by 2030.
And she mentioned the market value of European defense companies has tripled since 2022. That's a staggering statistic. It signals a shift from a peacetime economy to something that looks a lot more like a war-footing economy.
It does. And she wasn't just talking about guns. She was talking about trade as a strategic weapon. She was celebrating the Mercosur deal with Latin America.
Which took, what, 25 years to negotiate?
25 years. And then she teased a new deal with India. She called it the mother of all deals.
So Europe is scrambling to build its own alliances, independent of the US or China. But then you get French President Emmanuel Macron.
Right. If von der Leyen was the bad cop telling Europe to wake up,
Macron was the worst cop, telling everyone the whole system is broken.
Macron was incredibly sharp. He diagnosed the world as shifting toward a law of the strongest, a world without rules. And the kicker is, he wasn't just talking about Russia or China. He took a very direct, very public shot at the United States.
I caught that in the notes. He was talking about U.S. trade agreements. He used the word subordinate, didn't he?
He did. He said, U.S. trade policy aims to weaken and subordinate Europe. I mean, that is incredibly strong language for a NATO ally. He's saying the U.S. isn't a partner anymore. It's a competitor that wants to crush European industry.
So what's his solution? Because Macron always has a grand plan.
His solution is what he calls European preference. It's basically America first, but for Europe. He says Europeans have been too naive, keeping their markets open while the U.S. and China protect theirs.
So he wants to close the gates.
He does. And he also mentioned a capital markets union. Can we pause on that? Because it sounds like boring jargon, but it seems central to his point. What does that actually mean for the average person?
It's a great question, and it's really important. Right now, European financial markets are all fragmented. Every country has its own rules. So if you're a European saver or a pension fund, it's often just easier and more profitable to invest your money in the U.S. stock market.
So European money is flowing across the Atlantic to fund American companies.
Exactly. It's a massive capital flight. Macron wants to unify those markets so that European savings stay in Europe, funding European tech and defense, instead of flowing into U.S. bonds.
He wants to stop the brain drain and the money drain.
He's saying, if you don't respect the level playing field, we're going to take our ball and play inside our own fortress.
Okay, so Europe is building a fortress, but then we cross the Atlantic to the U.S. delegation, and the vibe could not be more different. We've got this interview with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and honestly, he sounds like he's at a completely different conference.
It's a tale of two realities. Europe is anxious, defensive. Bessent is projecting absolute swaggering confidence. He's touting a massive U.S. economic boom.
He cited, what was it, 4.7% private sector GDP growth? For a developed economy, that is huge.
That's emerging market level growth.
Yeah.
And he attributes it all to the Trump economic policy. He lists the pillars: deregulation, aggressive tax cuts, and that new policy of no tax on tips or overtime.
He's painting this picture of a massive capital expenditure boom in the U.S.
But the part that must have really stung the Europeans was his take on regulation.
Oh, that was brutal. He brought up the Draghi report, which is Europe's own internal audit on why they're losing competitiveness, but then he just twisted the knife.
He shared that anecdote that tech executives tell him it's easier to do business in China now than in the EU because of all the red tape.
Ouch. Saying communist China is easier to navigate than the EU. That is a slap in the face.
It was meant to be. Bessent's message was clear. The U.S. is growing because we cut red tape, and you are stagnating because you're drowning in it.
But here's where it gets nuanced. Because Bessent isn't some pure free market libertarian, is he? He defended tariffs very aggressively.
Right, that's the Trump paradox.
Yeah.
Bessent argues tariffs aren't just taxes, they are negotiating leverage. He used the fentanyl example, claiming that by threatening tariffs on Mexico and China, they force those governments to the table. He sees tariffs as a national security tool.
And there was another moment in his interview that really jumped out at me. For an administration that talks about deregulation, he sounded surprisingly interventionist on defense contractors.
That caught my ear too. This is where the ideology gets very flexible. He said defense contractors had let down the American people because they weren't making missiles fast enough.
So what did they do?
The government basically ordered them to stop stock buybacks and dividends. They told these private companies, stop paying your shareholders and start building factories. He explicitly said, you need to build more factories until further notice.
That sounds like a command economy, like something you'd see in a wartime government.
It's wartime capitalism.
Yeah.
He justified it by saying these companies only exist because of the U.S. Department of War. So you see this interesting hybrid model in the U.S. Hyper-capitalism for the consumer side, but strict state-directed control for national security.
And speaking of supply chains, he dropped a timeline on rare earth magnets.
Right. The stuff in everything from EV motors to missile guidance systems. China dominates that market. Besson said the U.S. plans to be independent, breaking reliance on China within 18 to 24 months.
That's lightning fast. To decouple a supply chain that complex in 2 years is ambitious.
It is. But it shows the level of focus the U.S. has on strategic independence. They don't want to rely on anyone, not China. And increasingly, it seems they don't care about relying on Europe either.
And this brings us to the most explosive story of the summit. So we have Europe pivoting, we have the U.S. booming and using tariffs, and then a specific story broke during Davos that completely derailed the agenda. And honestly, if this wasn't in the transcript, I would think it was a joke. It involves Greenland.
This is the flashpoint we mentioned. It sounds absurd on the surface, but the consequences are deadly serious.
Okay, break it down for us. Why is everyone fighting about Greenland?
Well, essentially, President Trump has renewed his push to purchase Greenland from the Kingdom of Denmark.
Right, we remember this from his first term. Everyone kind of laughed it off.
They're not laughing now. The logic is strategic. Greenland is crucial for controlling the Arctic, and as we just said, it's loaded with those rare earth minerals. But Denmark obviously said no. Greenland is not for sale. In fact, they were so insulted they refused to even attend Davos.
And the U.S. response wasn't just, okay, never mind.
No. The U.S. went nuclear. They threatened tariffs. A 10% import duty on 8 European nations, including the UK, France, and Germany, rising to 25% by June if they don't facilitate this deal.
Wait, hold on. The U.S. is threatening a trade war with its closest NATO allies because Denmark won't sell an island.
Correct. It's collective punishment to force Denmark's hand, and Ursula von der Leyen had to address it directly. She basically said, a deal is a deal, referring to past agreements, and warned that this would only help Russia and China. She stated flatly, the sovereignty of Greenland is non-negotiable.
But this isn't just about hurt feelings. There was real, tangible collateral damage from this at the summit.
This is the tragic part. There was supposed to be a massive announcement at Davos, an $800 billion prosperity initiative for post-war Ukraine. Designed by BlackRock, it was going to be the centerpiece of the whole forum.
A Marshall Plan for the 21st century. And what happened?
It was canceled, or at least the signing was delayed indefinitely. The reports say that European opposition to the Greenland deal just blew up the negotiations. The friction was so high they couldn't get the Ukraine deal across the line.
That is just heartbreaking. A massive recovery plan for a war-torn country held hostage by a dispute over buying territory.
And the optics got even worse, because Ukrainian President Zelensky didn't even come to Davos. He stayed in Kyiv.
Why? Was it a protest?
Partially that, a lack of expected results, but mostly just the brutal reality of the war. While the CEOs were in Switzerland, there were heavy Russian strikes on Kyiv. Zelensky reported 5,600 buildings in the capital were without heat.
Wow, that contrast is just stark. The global elite arguing over an island while the Ukrainian president deals with a freezing capital under bombardment.
It really highlights that disconnect Larry Fink was talking about. The spirit of dialogue is on the banner, but the reality is raw transaction. It's power politics.
Von der Leyen did try to offer an olive branch on the Arctic, though, right?
She did. She's trying to be the adults in the room. She said Europe stands with Greenland's sovereignty, but, this is key, she said Europe is willing to invest in Arctic security with the U.S.
So offering the strategic benefit without the territorial sale.
Exactly. She's trying to de-escalate. But with the U.S. threatening 25% tariffs, it doesn't sound like that offer is being accepted just yet.
So let's zoom out. We started with this idea of a spirit of dialogue. But as we look at all these pieces, the U.S., Europe, this Greenland dispute, what's the big takeaway?
I think the expert take here is that we're watching the death of the global economy as a single concept. We're moving from global rules to bilateral deals where, as von der Leyen said, a deal is a deal only as long as it suits the stronger party. The spirit of dialogue is being replaced by the spirit of transaction.
It feels like everyone is building a fortress.
That's the perfect image. You have the American fortress, fueled by deregulation and tariffs. You have the European fortress, currently under construction, fueled by defense spending and protectionism.
And in the middle?
In the middle, you have countries like Ukraine or issues like climate change that need global cooperation. And they're getting caught in the crossfire. If every interaction is just a transaction, the things that don't make an immediate profit get left behind.
It's a sobering thought. Record growth in some places, but a complete breakdown of trust.
Scott Bessent said something very telling. Money flows to where it is treated best, That's the capitalist creed. But if Europe responds by closing its doors, and the U.S. uses money as a weapon, well, then the flow of money stops being about efficiency. It starts being about power.
And that leads us to our closing thought for you, the listener. We've spent decades being told that a globalized economy makes war less likely. But if we really are seeing the end of that order and the birth of these competing regional fortresses, does that make the world safer for the people inside the walls or much more dangerous for everyone?
That's the question that should keep us all up at night.
On that note, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Davos 2026. It's a lot to process, but understanding these colliding worldviews is really the only way to make sense of what's coming next.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.